we really put the employee at the start of what we are doing here when we talk to organizations about deploying Microsoft Teams. For us, the most important thing you can do to be successful with your Microsoft Teams deployment is ensure that you understand your end user requirement. So I mentioned we oftentimes start with the end user and what that end user experience is going to be. And you'll see here on our methodology, that's exactly where we started. So we feel it's most important to lay the foundation for your team's deployment by focusing on the strategy and design work that you're going to do up front to make sure that when you deploy this solution, it's actually meeting the needs of your end users who will actually be using that solution. So the next phase is kind of that build and migrate phase. That's the phase that all of us within IT feel very comfortable working with, and that's what we're used to doing when we deploy technology. You also need to look at what are you going to do long-term to make sure this solution is not only going to meet your needs today, but in the future by adopting some type of a governance model for that and ensuring that you've executed an adoption and change management solution as part of what you're doing here. And then finally, make sure you're training both the end users as well as the system administration team on how to use the tool going forward.
When we look at adopting Teams, it's a big job, right? And there's a lot happening in real time. It's really important to prioritize what you do first based on the impact it can have on your business while also understanding the implementation effort around people and processes to execute. Every touch point you create into Teams drives overall Teams adoption. So finding the things that you can do that have a low impact on the IT deployment side, but big impact and create many value-add touch points for your end users, that's the best place to start. When you look at who to engage around adoption, your first instinct is to go to leaders, business leaders, executives, leaders with title. Don't forget about other leaders or influencers in your environment. Champions will increase the impact of your message exponentially. So who are these people? They're the people who are most enthusiastic about new technology and ways of working. They're the people that send in all the tickets for the new stuff you launch, asking questions. They're known leaders, but not necessarily leaders with title. They're people who come to you with challenges and solutions when it comes to technology, and really, they're early adopters, and you know who early adopters are. Seek them out and bring them into your project.
When you talk about deployment, strategy, planning, adoption change management, ultimately the icing on the cake to truly drive adoption and make sure that your users are consuming Teams is to put together a comprehensive training plan that's going to be customizable and scalable. So first is the assessment when you consider the requirements for the project. What do the users need to know? What do the users need to do? Maybe you have different types of users and different types of use cases and roles within your organization, depending on the type of user we're talking about, depending on someone's digital competency, thinking about the department that they sit in. So making sure that we truly understand all of that and also taking into consideration different languages and locations that would ultimately help us craft the training accordingly. And we kind of move into that planning phase where we think about how we can design that program based on everything that we discovered in the assessment phase. And that's where we start talking about customizing content and making sure that it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It may not be just a Teams 101 training. Again, as I mentioned earlier, with different competencies and different job roles and skill sets, we need to make sure that your users have the right amount of training, but ultimately that the content is going to resonate with them to make sure that you see that level of consumption that you want. Otherwise, you could potentially see your help desk call skyrocket, which nobody wants. We start piloting those sessions and really starting to think about when you launch the communication plan that John and Peter were talking about, so you can start to formally let your customers know, your end users know what is coming down the pipe, what's in it for them, and what types of resources are going to be available to them, be it training, champion network, or different events throughout the organization to make sure that people understand, again, what's in it for them. And then lastly, with the additional empowerment, like VIP one-on-ones or desk side support, as well as e-learning. Offering your users different tools is going to make for a blended approach to your ultimate path to a successful deployment. The fact that you need to make sure that you can truly crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run. And I think that's really important when you consider the speed at which a particular user is going to move through a deployment. And what I mean by that is really thinking about the different types of training that's available whether it's e-learning, live instructor-led training, and the different types of methodologies. We really want you to have some takeaways here, right? So thinking about a 5-step action plan. Number 1, make sure that you are interviewing your stakeholders and understand how Teams is going to impact the organization. That is so important, because if you don't do that, you really can't define a strategy to make sure that you're leveraging Teams the way that your stakeholders really want Teams to be leveraged, right? And once you have that strategy, how do we measure our success? So putting some critical success factors and measurable outcomes out there, whether it's looking at your overall consumption through various reports, polling your users, or just feedback that you potentially get from your help desk and your IT staff, as well as from your champion network. Identifying a champion network and adoption change management strategy is key to this entire integrated solution, as Peter and John spoke about. It's absolutely vital to make sure that we go from planning, strategy, and deployment to training with a cohesive in-between of that adoption change management piece around communications and making sure that your users understand, again, what's in it for them. And then lastly, making sure that you're assessing the knowledge gaps and implementing a training program, as I just talked about. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So think about the different modalities and methodologies that are out there to make sure that we can understand your organization, that you understand the needs of your users, as well as the tool sets that are available. Ultimately, that is going to drive a new way of working and how things will be handled moving forward when you think about chat, meet, call, and collaborate.